There is a field of granular synthesis having roots which reach back to times even before PCs and even synthesizers did exist. The so-called serious modern music of the second half of the 20th century dealt with it, whatever the term serious might mean. I'm talking about composers like Yannis Xenakis or Curtis Rhodes, Paul Lansky and others. For further information about the history of the granular view at music, please read the excellent work of Timothy Opies. You will find a link in the description under this video. Let's go at least some small steps into a special part of this area to tell you at once there is still a large field left for investigations of your own, and be prepared to consume some quite complex things in the following few minutes. You will get rewarded by 3 sound examples at the very end of this tutorial. Let me demonstrate what happens with the different length adjustments and birth at, let's choose 25 milliseconds. The content of the grains is a simple sine wave with a frequency of about 250 Hz. With other values of birth, especially shorter ones, the mentioned phenomena occur at other adjustments of length, of course, but they always do occur. We can draw a graph then. I've done it. Here it is. The x-axis shows the birth values. The y-axis shows the length of the grains. The different lines depict top to bottom. BA mod, the border of audible modulations. BO-sim, the border of losing symmetry. VO-BSB, the beginning of vanishing of the root node. VO-BSC, the border where the root node has completely vanished. AOLF, the appearance of lower dominant frequencies. AOHF, the appearance of higher dominant frequencies. And at last, CAM, the line of clean and simple amplitude modulation with only 2 sidebands. The whole matter is amazingly interesting and important for serious compositions, especially with more complex contents of the grains, more complex than a simple sine wave. But I will not go very much deeper into it in this video. Let me show you just a few extractions from the main graph. The border of audible modulation, the region of very low and very high sidebands, the region where the recognizability of the content of the grain, here our root node of 250 Hz, gradually vanishes. Well, I think it's time for some explanations. What we have seen is the result of the interaction of the grain window, what is the grain's loudness envelope, and the grain's content, our sine wave. The shorter the grain, the more influence does the grain window have. To make it kind of simple, with a grain of 1 minute length, the attack and the decay phases make, let's say, perhaps 5% of the whole grain. But with a grain's length of, let's say, 10 milliseconds only, attack and decay together make more or less the whole grain. This increasing and decreasing of the loudness of the grain's content is a frequency as well. This frequency is higher with shorter grains and shorter birth times. This frequency of the envelope modulates the amplitude of the grain's content. We get amplitude modulation. And with grain lengths and birth rates of less than 50 milliseconds, the frequencies of these goings-on are well in an audible region with wavelengths of 50 milliseconds and less, corresponding to 20 Hz and more. Let me at least shortly talk about the influence of different contents of the grains. First, there is never amplitude modulation with the grain's length of exactly 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, and so on of the birth's length. And it doesn't depend either on the frequency nor the structure or complexity of the grain's content. Second, it's the same with the classic and simple amplitude modulation at the point length equals birth. Third, and again, the length-birth combination at which the higher side bands get dominant is not dependent on the grain's content. But now it gets different. Number 4. Well, it's again not dependent on the content's spectral complexity, but on its basic frequency at which length-birth combination the audible modulations begin. However, this relationship is not a linear one. The content's frequencies of 50 Hz to 800 Hz, here the borderline of audible modulation changes towards shorter lengths of the grains. But increasing the content's frequency up to slightly above 1 kHz makes the borderline go up to higher grain lengths again, so that it doesn't need to have very short grains to hear amplitude modulation. And then, with content frequencies of far above 1000 Hz, there is no change of this borderline anymore. 5. The higher the content's frequency, the shorter can the grain be without losing the root note or without the content getting not any more recognizable. The lines VOBSB and VOBSC go down. And the more complex and richer with partials the grain's content is, the shorter can a grain be without losing the recognizability of its original content. And the last thing, the higher the content's frequency, the shorter can a grain be before producing those dominant low sidebands. This, and the last mentioned number 5, work for each individual partial of the original content's spectrum individually, so that with a complex sound in the grain, this sound gets gradually destructed when decreasing the length of the grains. Musically, enormously interesting. Well, I'm afraid I've already gone too deep into the matter, at least too deep for this video. Let me give you only one last idea for experiments of your own, though. What happens, try to find it out, when the grains are shorter than a complete cycle of the content's waveform, with non-overlapping grains? Birth is longer than length. Well, really, try it out. Let's go and look and listen to the promised examples now. Inspired by the often shown graph of different modulations, the first example extracts sound from different regions of the length to birth relation in 5 horizontal and 3 vertical bands using the modulation function of CrusherX. We will talk about these modulation functions later in one video of this series. This example shows how a simple sine wave playing only a single note can sound like when CrusherX gets its hands on it. The second example changes length and birth along the shown path, crossing every of the border lines except the border of audible modulations itself. The content of the grains is gained from small pieces of glass clinking against each other. Thank you for watching and listening.